So John Brill told me he had all day so I could preach as long as I wanted. Nobody laughed. How about this? What happens when a frog's car breaks down? It gets towed, right? Someone once asked me if I knew any shepherd jokes, and I said, I heard a few. Let that one sink in. If you were with us last week, we started this new message series that we've called Dangerous Prayers. And I've told you that I believe that one of these messages will be what I call an anchor message for some of you. And what I mean by that is there's some messages in my life that I can remember exactly where I was when I heard them. I remember exactly what the pastor said. I remember exactly what God did in my heart because it changed me from that point on. And I believe over the next 2 weeks, that including last week, that one of these three messages will be one of those messages in your life. And next week, we're going to talk about a really dangerous prayer. We're going to talk about how praying to God about send me. God, send me wherever you want me to go. But maybe the hardest of all three messages would be the one this morning. When we say, God, break me. There's many of you that you hear that and you say, there is no way that I'm ever going to pray that. There's no way that I'm ever going to ask God to break me. I refuse. And I remember the first time in my life that I asked God to break me. I said, God, break me. Give me a heart like yours. Allow me to see people the way that you do. And let me tell you, he answered that prayer. During one of the most difficult times of my life, we were at a church and there were some things that happened, and I don't want to get into the details of that, but by no fault of my own, I was in this place where I was ready to give up on ministry. The pastor that I was sitting under had done some things, and I was ready to give up. I couldn't understand, God, why are you letting me go through this? Why am I having to do this? Why in the world is this going on? And then I remembered asking God to break me, to give me a heart like his. And I can tell you, looking back, that there's times that when God breaks you, that on the other side there is so much greatness. Because during that time when I was broken, I had nothing that I could do but rely on God, but depend on him to change everything. And this morning, I want to just talk about two little stories. And the first one, it deals with a prostitute. Like, there's no one in life that has ever been young and said, you know, I want to be a prostitute when I get older. It just doesn't happen. But we see this story of this lady, and we don't know what caused her to get into the profession that she did. The Bible doesn't tell us what happened, what made her become this prostitute, but the truth of the matter is that she was hated by most women. They hated who she was. They hated what she did. She was used by some men, and maybe she was doing it because she was a single mother and she was trying to take care of her kids, and it was the only way that she knew how. But whatever the reason, she had been hated and treated poorly for so long. But then she meets Jesus. She runs into this guy named Jesus, and he starts treating her like no man ever has in her life. He treats her so greatly that all of a sudden she realizes that something inside her wants to worship this man. That he's everything that she's ever wanted. He's everything that she's ever needed, and she decides that she wants to worship him. So if you look at Mark chapter 14 and verse 3, it says this: while Jesus was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman, and this is the sinful woman we're talking about, with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume. And let me just stop right here. In this story right now, we have Jesus, the rabbi, in the home of Simon the leper. And listen, most people would have ran away from lepers. They would have done whatever they could to get as far away as possible. And here Jesus is running toward him. So you've got Rabbi Jesus, you've got a leper, and this almost sounds like a joke. There's a prostitute, right? A rabbi, a leper, and a prostitute walk into a bar. No. But it's a crazy thing that's going on here. And she sees Jesus, and he's done this amazing thing, and he's changed her heart, and she comes in with this really, really expensive perfume. And the reason that this is so important, and the reason that we talk about this, is because the gospel tells us that this perfume cost about a year's worth of wages. Think about that for a moment. Let's just say that it costs $25,000 in today's society. That's some pretty expensive perfume. And it was so important because most women didn't wear perfume. It was such a rare commodity, and these women that were prostitutes, they would wear this perfume as mostly like a calling card. They would have it on, and they'd be walking down the street, and then a man would know, oh, there she is. And you would know immediately who she was and what she was doing, and she's got this expensive perfume. And in the next part of the verse, it says she did what? She broke the jar. And then it says, and she poured it out on his head. She broke it and she poured it out. And there's a lot of people that, when there's pastors, I've heard them say, you know, these people around her, they just lacked faith. They saw her and what she was doing, and they lacked faith. And listen, if I was there, I would have been freaking out too. Could you imagine someone just walking into the room and they just start pouring out a $25,000 bottle of perfume? We all would have been like, what is she doing? Save that, sell it. You can do a lot. Just give him a drop. One or two. You don't need to waste all that. We'll split it up. We'll sell the rest, and we'll feed the poor. That's what I would have thought. But essentially what she's saying is, look, I'm leaving my past behind. Everything I was, everything that I've been known as, everything that I am, I'm leaving all of that behind. Because all of a sudden she is getting rid of her calling card. She's getting rid of her identity, the thing that made her who she was. She's saying all of that is behind me. And not only that, she's changing the course of her future. She's saying, I can't do this anymore. Without that perfume, she couldn't go on doing what she was doing because no one would have known who she was. So she broke it and she poured it out, all in one selfless, extravagant moment of worship. And the second story is right after the first story, and it's in the same book. If you go in the same chapter in verse 22, it says this: as they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it into pieces and gave it to his disciples, saying, take it, for this is my body. And he took a cup of wine and he gave thanks to God for it, and he gave it to them, and they all drank it. And he said, this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. He said, it is what? He said, it is poured out as a sacrifice for many. My body is broken for you. My blood will be poured out. My jar is broken in an act of worship, and I'll pour it all out because I'm giving you everything I am. And both broken and poured. And Luke, he reports on the same story, and he was at the table. Mark was there, Luke was there, the rest of the disciples was there, and Luke wrote about it, and he told the story in almost the exact same way. And this is what Luke said in Luke 22:19. He said basically the same thing. He said, Jesus took bread and he gave thanks, and he did what? He poured it out. He broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. He said, do this in remembrance of me. Do this in remembrance of me. And when we think about this, and most scholars would agree that what we're talking about here is the Lord's Supper. He's saying, do this in remembrance of me. So we come together and we take the Lord's Supper to remember his death and his resurrection and what he poured out for us. But what if, not just the ritual, he's saying, do your life in the same manner. Do your life just like I did my life. Live in the same way that I'm about to live. Allow yourself to be broken and poured out. What if he's telling us, don't just take the ritual, but allow yourself to be broken and poured out? Back in the day, if you would have said, hey man, the thing that you need to do is pray to be broken, I would have said there's no way. And listen, there's so many of us here today that we say, I can't pray that prayer. I can't pray for God to break me because listen, it's dangerous. When you come to this place and you say, God, break me, he will. And I think so many of us are afraid to ask God to break us because we feel so alone. How could I ever allow God to break me when I'm going through this life and there's no one to help me? How could I ever allow God to break me? See, our society has come to this place where we really don't come together anymore. We don't have to. In the palm of your hand, you can talk to 500 people at the same time and stay in our house where it's cool and people don't get germs on us and they're not weird and we can shut them off if we want to. And we've made ourselves, and society has helped us to be alone. And this thought of God break me scares us to death. Because we know if we ask him to, he will. But how could we ever get through that? And we remember the times in our lives that we've been broken. And we say, I never want to go through that again. And that's why community is so important. That's why I believe small groups are so important, because you come together and we do life together. You're not broken alone, but you're broken together. And there is power in a group of friends and a group of people that will stand beside you and say, you know what? I'm here for you. No matter what it is you're going through, I am here for you. But if I think back to those times when God has broken me, what I realize is that on the other side of a broken moment, life is normally better than it was before. Because God mends you back together in a way that you never could have imagined. Your dependence upon him is greater. I believe with my entire heart that God's breakings often lead to his greatest blessings. That when God breaks you, that most of the time it leads to the greatest blessings in your life. And when you think to Peter, I think this proves to be true. He said, Jesus, you know, I'll never deny you. But he denied him 3 times. And on the 3rd time, Jesus is looking at Peter as Peter is denying him, and he would be completely broken. The man that he loved, the thing that he said he would never do, he's doing while Jesus is looking directly at him. He was broken. But he was also forgiven by Jesus. And after the resurrection, he was the one that was chosen to be the guest speaker on the day of Pentecost. That's a pretty big deal. 3,000 people that day were born into the family of God. Because those who God uses the greatest are often those who he has broken the deepest. He'll never waste a hurt in your life. And there's some of you here right now and you say, there's no way. There is no way that I would allow God to do that. There's no way you can get me to pray that, brother. But this week and last week go hand in hand. Last week we prayed, oh God, search me. Look into my life and find out if there are any unclean ways in me, God, and show me what those are. And if you were courageous enough to pray those last week, I guarantee you that he told you something. And today you can say, God, break me from it. Whatever it was that he illuminated in your life, you can say, God, break me from that. God, break me from my pride. God, break me from my materialism. Whatever it was that he showed you, you can ask God to break you. And really, we think about this, and we think, man, that's some advanced Christianity, but really it's not. This isn't just for like monks and missionaries and women who only wear skirts or have their hair in buns. It's not like that. This is for everyone. This is saying, Jesus, I'm coming to you. Break all of the things in my life that don't line up according to your will. Jesus, break out everything in my life that keeps me from you. Break it all away. I pour my life out at your feet. I give you all that I have, all that I am, and I lay it down before you. God, break me. That's just basic Christianity. But for some of us, it seems like more because really, we're just kind of part-time Christians. You know, we're Christians when it kind of helps us out a little bit more. We kind of go to church when it helps us, when we have time for it, when there's nothing else in the way, then we make room for it. We make room for God when there's other Christians around that are looking, we'll pray then. But Christianity is so much more. When we give our hearts to Jesus, it should change everything about you. It should change your passion and your desires so deeply that it changes the core of who you are. See, our mission at this church is to bring people to Jesus Christ and to grow all in his service. That's why we exist. And I believe with all my heart that it represents the exact heart of God. We can't do that if we're just partially devoted to Jesus. We can only do that if we're fully devoted to him. So if you find yourself at any point only partially devoted to Jesus, let me encourage you to consider praying a very dangerous prayer. Say, God, break me. Show me how to be fully dependent on you. Whatever it is that's in my life, I want to give it to you, God, if it keeps me from coming to you. Just do whatever it takes. Break me so I know you better. If the worship team would come. Would you stand with me? This week, it kind of goes like this. Last week, if you were courageous enough to pray, God, search me. Show me all the things that are unclean in me, God. And this week, I want you to pray, God, break me. Whatever it is that he showed you, he showed you that didn't line up according to his will and purpose, that you say, God, break me. Break me of my anger. Break me of my lust. Break me of my self-sufficiency. Lord, help me to depend on you. And then be ready, because he will. I want to encourage you to find a group of people in your life that will stand beside you through whatever it is that God has for you. That will come beside you and say, you know what, no matter what you're going through, I've got your back. Will you pray with me this morning? Father, we thank you. Father, I thank you for what you're doing in the life of this church. Father, I thank you for what you're doing in my life personally. Lord, I pray that as the worship team begins to play in a moment, Father, that you would speak to our hearts. And Father, if there's anything that is unclean in us that you need to break, Father, I pray that you would help us this week to break free from all of that. Lord, I pray that you'd help us to lay it all down at your feet. Lord, this morning as the worship team plays, Lord, I pray that you'd bring people that need prayer to our prayer team, to me, so that we could pray together. Jesus, we thank you. In your mighty name we pray. Amen.